Okay, so hi everybody, welcome to today's session. So as Alison says, we're going to be looking at building confidence and reducing social isolation today. This is a topic that's quite close to me because I recognise that my children who are autistic have had difficulties with this in the past, and I've supported them through these difficulties. So very close to me to be talking about this today, yeah. So Alison and Fiona has kindly went through a lot of the things. I might not be able to answer all the questions today just due to the timings that we have, but I'll try my best. Like they said, write them in the chat box, and if I don't get to them at a later date, we can put them into a frequently asked questions document, which we've done before. Now, you don't have to be furiously writing notes because everything we're going to talk about today is illustrated in a booklet that accompanies the session. So I'm going to send that booklet out for everybody. I'll send it out to Alison and she can distribute that after the session, okay? So yeah, who am I then? Because you might not have heard of me before, and I certainly probably haven't met any of you before. So my name's Tanya. As Alison said, I started my career 20 odd years ago now working in the field of autism. I started with the National Autistic Society as a volunteer, and then very quickly was asked to take on a paid role there. So I spent most of my time working in education in one of our residential schools, supporting children in education, supporting transitions into adulthood. But towards the end of my career with NAS, I worked predominantly supporting parents, families, professionals to better understand autism and working a lot with autistic people themselves. So not to bore you, but I have a variety of experience in the field of autism. Now that's kind of me professionally. From a personal perspective, I've just told you I have 2 children with autism. So I have a son, Daniel, who's 25 now, which makes me sound really old. I feel really old. And Daniel was diagnosed when he was 2. He has autism, Tourette's and OCD. And then I have a daughter, Rachel, who's 22, and she's just recently been diagnosed with autism through the adult autism team in Glasgow, and her diagnosis is autism and ADHD. And then I'm also autistic, hence my extreme anxiety at the moment. It's a good job you can't see inside my head. But yeah, so I got my diagnosis when I was 40. So 8 years ago now, and yeah, it really changed my life in lots of ways. I won't bore you with it, but yeah, I'm happy that I finally got a diagnosis of autism, and my diagnosis is autism and sensory processing disorder. So yeah, we know that autism doesn't always come along on its own, eh? It can come along with other conditions too, and my family has lots of other conditions alongside their autism. So yeah, not just a professional who's, you know, read lots of books and worked in the field, but also living and breathing it every day as well through myself and my family, yeah. Probably some things to know about me when you're thinking about your questions is I'm a very honest person, so you'll get a very honest answer. Sometimes that can be a wee bit too much information, so please kind of forgive me if that happens, yeah. And yeah, the reason that I've asked Alison to continue to be on screen is because, like many other autistic people, I really struggle to read facial expressions, and you know, it's really difficult for me to present with just a blank screen because I don't know how people feel, whether they're okay, whether they're understanding the information, etc. So having Alison on screen is going to help give a bit of that visual feedback that I need when I'm delivering. So thank you, Alison. I really, really appreciate that. Right, so without further ado then, let's get going. So yeah, hopefully you'll enjoy the session. So what we're going to cover today is looking at some of the key factors that affect motivation and self-esteem in autistic children and young people. Looking at supporting them to build self-esteem. We know that a lot of people with autism really struggle with their self-esteem and confidence. So this is an area where we really need to kind of pay a bit more attention to it and concentrate on it. We're also going to be looking at how to support them, you know, what are the kind of primary things we should be thinking about when we're supporting them to spend time with other people, why that might be difficult and how we can help. We'll probably, you know, what we're going to talk about throughout the session, part of it is that not everybody with autism wants to spend time with other people. So that's a consideration that we know that everybody with autism is really unique and individual. So we'll have some people who are very kind of own agenda and they like to be on their own and they would find it very difficult to be around other people. My son would be an example of that. He's okay with the immediate family group, but outside of that, he finds it very difficult. But then my daughter is completely the opposite of that, and I am too. We love spending time with other people, but it still comes with lots of difficulties, you know, understanding other people, facial expressions, gestures, body language, simple things like knowing how to introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Tanya, and how to start a conversation with that small talk that you guys use that I don't really understand. Knowing what to talk about, how long, you know, understanding where the pauses are, if people are bored, disinterested, if they've got something to say. All these things can be a bit of a minefield for autistic people. And then, of course, the major one is how to get out of interaction when you've had enough. And we know that a lot of people will get anxious while they're in interaction and then can forget or not remember their strategies to get out of that situation. So we might see that they use their behaviour to stop an interaction. So we're going to talk about, you know, lots of things like that. So hopefully that feels okay for everybody. There will be a wee part as well where we talk about kind of extreme isolation. So this is a situation that I definitely went through with my daughter when she went into her secondary school, where she stopped going to school gradually over time, and reducing, you know, into the house, and then over a period of time also stopped coming down into the house and was isolating herself in a bedroom. So I'm going to talk a wee bit about how we managed that, because to start with, I did some things that really didn't help because I wasn't sure how to deal with it. Now I kind of understand, you know, a more positive way of helping them to build that confidence again, to come out the bedroom again and get involved in family life, and then eventually get involved in, you know, being out in the community again. Should say that although we went through that tricky time, Rachel's now in her 4th year at Glasgow Uni doing astrophysics, and she's, for the most part, a wee social butterfly. So if anybody is in that situation where their child's really isolating, there is hope at the other side. It just depends what kind of strategies you put in place, I guess. Yeah, so we'll have a wee chat about that a wee bit later as well. So hopefully that feels okay for everybody. Alison, that feel okay? Yeah. Cool, right, so let's get going then. So like a lot of people talk about self-esteem, you know, and it's not, you know, we talk about having maybe good self-esteem or poor self-esteem, but let's have a think about what it actually is, because some people, you know, we don't go into too much detail about it, do we? We just say, oh, they've not got good self-esteem, or that person's got really high self-esteem. Yeah, so self-esteem is really about how we feel about ourselves, whether we feel good about ourselves, whether, you know, we don't think we're doing too well, for example. Yeah, and it can obviously affect the way that we act and feel on a daily basis. If you're, you know, having a good time and you feel boosted and you feel like there are lots of things going right in your life, and that you're doing really well with things, then obviously that's going to boost your self-esteem. But when and then you're going to be more of a positive kind of person. You're going to have that resilience to, you know, do the things that you want to do in life. But if you're not feeling like that and times are tough and you're struggling to understand the world around you, as many autistic, you know, people do, then, and you're trying very, very hard, but sometimes, you know, getting it wrong, making mistakes, making social faux pas, then yeah, that can really impact on our self-esteem over time. Now, we know that many autistic children and teenagers do struggle with their self-esteem. And, you know, one of the reasons for that is that we can really struggle with very high levels of anxiety sometimes, which obviously impact then on the way that we perceive the world and understand the world around us. So yeah, this kind of all plays into one another. Now, I probably will say to start with, though, that like if I think about myself as a child, and to a certain extent now as an adult, my self-esteem isn't great at times. And, you know, people can see that because I'd be very down on myself. I talk a lot about, oh, I was rubbish at that, or there I go making another mistake. How stupid of me. I absolutely strive for perfection in everything I do, which a lot of you might see in your autistic children or people that you support. And when I can't be perfect, that really has an impact on me. So it can be quite obvious sometimes that I have low self-esteem, but Daniel would be the opposite of that, okay? So Daniel on the outside looks as if he has really high self-esteem and confidence. So he is a person that would tell you, I'm amazing, I'm brilliant at everything, you're an idiot, I'm better than you at this. And he constantly, you know, that's the way that he communicates with people, which is really difficult then to be around him because, you know, people take offense when he's talking to them, obviously. But as much as he comes across like that, I often have to try and explain to people that Daniel hasn't really got high self-esteem. Daniel has really poor self-esteem, and he's using all that bravado, if you like, to mask the difficulties that essentially he knows that he is having. So what I'm trying to say is that children and, you know, autistic adults can mask the difficulties they have in their self-esteem to make you think that, you know, everything's okay, and to help them to cope with them negative feelings that they're having as well. But it doesn't mean if you see that kind of bravado that they're not struggling just as much, yeah? So essentially low self-esteem is just feeling rubbish about yourself, or, you know, situations that you're in and how you're dealing with them situations. That makes sense, Alison? Yeah. I always think that's important to say because, you know, like I said, on the outside, people think that Daniel's just full of himself, but I see a very different situation with Daniel. Obviously, I know him, you know, better than anybody else. So, yeah. So yeah, it's important that we try and focus on self-esteem, because self-esteem is what is going to help us to have the ability to cope with and bounce back from mistakes that we make in life. Like I said, it's not unusual for people with autism to have lots of social faux pas where they might be in interactions or they might be engaged in activities and they don't understand the expectations or the demands, or they can't read the interaction of other people, so they end up making mistakes. If you had good self-esteem, then that would help you with looking at those mistakes, unpicking them, working out what went wrong, and then shifting your mindset to that more positive, right? Okay, it went wrong, but everybody makes mistakes, and here's what I'm going to do to fix that next time. So really important self-esteem for helping you to do that, yeah? It's going to help you to have pride in the things that you do manage to do really well, so in your efforts and achievements. And I think, like, it's really important to say, if you have quite poor self-esteem, and you know, anybody who's ever been depressed or felt really low in mood will relate to this, but if you have quite poor self-esteem, even sometimes when you do get it right and you're doing really well, you will not recognise them achievements that you've made. Your brain kind of still takes you to that negative place. And, you know, yes, well, I did do well with that, but what about all the things that went wrong while I was doing that? And your brain kind of shifts you to that negative bit, doesn't it? It doesn't allow you to focus on the positives. So yeah, positive self-esteem is really important because it's going to help you, like, appreciate the things that you've done really well. Yeah, it's really going to help you to cope with direction from other people. So again, like, if you have poor self-esteem, when people are trying to support you, it can feel like they're kind of nagging at you, or they're essentially telling you you got it wrong and this is a better way to do it. So if you have more positive self-esteem, you're going to be able to kind of appreciate what that person's adding in for you, and again, be able to see the positives of that and go, yeah, well, that's a good idea. I could try it this way instead. Yeah, so it's going to help with all these things, and also accepting criticism, which is part of that. You know, for somebody to tell you that, well, you did a really good job, but here's a bit where you could improve on next time. And like, I understand that I really struggle with that. So an example of that would be doing a job the other day, and at the end of the session, the person fed back that it was an amazing session, thank you very much, but here's a wee bit that might help you next time to cope with an area of difficulty that you had. And again, like, I read all the words that said, well done, everybody loved it, you did a great job, but my brain just totally homed in on that one, you know, sentence that said, here's what you could do better next time. And honestly, got to the point where I woke up at 2 o'clock in the morning and this sentence was in my head, and I just kept playing it over and over again, but I didn't do a great job, because here's where they think I could improve next time. So yeah, positive self-esteem is really going to help deal with situations like that too. And then it also just helps us to have an optimistic outlook. So it's like that example of is your glass half empty or is it half full? And if you have like a positive self-esteem, then you're more likely to be that person that has a glass half full rather than a glass half empty. Yeah. That's one of them literalisms, and I know that, you know, a lot of people with autism don't like literalisms because it confuses them, and I'm a bit like that. And right now in my head, I'm definitely visualising glasses that have got liquid in them, and one's, yeah, it's complicated. Yeah, so I don't tend to like using literalisms, but that's a really good one. Yeah. So yeah, definitely something that we need to concentrate on, because if they have poor self-esteem, it's really going to affect them lots. Yeah. Now, when we're having a think about boosting self-esteem, then it's really not too complicated. Really, what we're talking about is thinking about the things that make that person happy or help them to feel relaxed. And what their kind of special interests or hobbies are that might kind of have that ability to do that for them. Now, what you can see on your screen is an example of what we call the Arousal Cave. Now, the Arousal Cave has been taken from the Challenging Behaviour Foundation website, okay? And when we look at the Arousal Cave, it helps to show the different stages that we go through when we're upset or distressed that can lead to a meltdown, how we recover, etc. That's in another seminar. But what I really wanted to concentrate on at the moment is this green phase. And a lot of people don't talk a lot about this green phase. So green phase for me is really where a person is calm, happy, contented. And I think that there are four main things that help to keep a person, any person, but particularly people with autism, in that green phase. And obviously, the longer they can be in green, the better for them, to be honest, because, you know, that's where you're going to be able to process information better. That's the phase where you're going to be understanding demands better, and your brain's just going to be functioning a lot better. So these four things are, you can see in the corner there, green people. So what we're talking about here is people in your life that are people that communicate really well. So, you know, they are people that talk more slowly, they break things down into, you know, small amounts of information, they give lots of processing time, they might back up their communication with visual aids as well, because, you know, lots of people, if they're anxious, they can't process verbal. So these green people are going to be people that understand that, and they back things up with visual communication as well. They're people that you might spend more time with, so you are better able to understand their facial expressions, gestures, body language, for example. And they're people that you feel comfortable communicating with, so because they're predictable. So like an example would be that most of Daniel's green people are people that are actual close family members, and they're people that over the years he has understood what, you know, the way that they communicate with him and the types of, you know, the way that conversation might go. Daniel would find it very difficult to speak to a person outside of the family, and he often speaks in third person. So, for example, if he met you and you asked him a question, I would have to repeat that question to Daniel, then he would answer me, and then I answer that other person. And the reason for that is that Daniel doesn't know that person, so he doesn't understand their facial expressions, etc. And he can't really predict very easily what that person is going to then say back to him and how that conversation is going to be. So a green person ticks all these boxes that we were just talking about. So for Daniel, it would be his dad, my mum, that would be his green people, and a support worker that he has, yeah. Now, it's a really good idea to think about who the green people are in that child's life and what makes them people green people. Because if you can work out how those people communicate and what's right about that, then you can help other people to understand that's the way they need to communicate as well. And then we build more green people in that person's life, if that makes sense, yeah. I just think it's funny talking about green people because, like, I'm just imagining the Hulk in my head. And obviously we're not literally talking about people who are green or who paint themselves green, yeah. Again, just a wee insight into how my brain works, yeah. So the next kind of thing that's going to help keep in that calm, happy phase is your green environments. So again, this is an environment that would be set up to meet your child's sensory needs. It's an environment where they feel safe, where there probably isn't too many unpredictable demands going on. So a lot of the time it's going to be their bedrooms. For Daniel, it's definitely his bedroom, and because we understand that's his green environment, we have very strict rules in our house about going into Daniel's room, and Daniel appreciates that my bedroom is my green space as well. So over time we've put signs on the door that say, I feel okay, you know, you can knock and come in, or I don't feel okay, please stay away. And that is a way that we can communicate that, you know, I'm okay just now if you come in and talk to me and essentially, you know, place a social demand on me, or no, you cannot come in right now because I cannot process any more information or demands. Yeah, if I ignore that and just go into Daniel's room, he'll get out his bed really quickly and, you know, on occasions has attacked me to make me get out that room. Yeah. So what makes that a green environment for Daniel is those rules, but also it's the way that it's set up from a sensory perspective. So for some children, it might be an environment that's really tidy, everything's kind of tidied away, and that reduces all the sensory stimulation and helps their brain, you know, to process better. For some people like Daniel, Daniel's room is a tip, it would be fair to say. There is lots of stuff in there and he's a bit of a hoarder, so it is a very busy room, but that's the way that Daniel needs his environment to be. He needs to be surrounded by sensory input because he's very undersensitive and he's seeking lots of information. So yeah, again, I learned a long time ago that I cannot go into Daniel's bedroom and tidy up. That actually, the last time I did that, that led to a week of Daniel not leaving his bedroom because I don't know what you're going to do in there when I'm not there. So yeah, and we just have really strong rules again, like you can't take food in there. So as long as you don't take food in there, I won't come into your room. Yeah. Other kind of green environments would be the great outdoors. He, you know, anything where there's not a lot of people trying to communicate, that's a green environment. My mum's got a piano room at her house and Daniel loves playing piano and can go there and kind of chill. So that would be a green environment. So yeah, having a think what they are. Because again, if you can think of the things that, you know, it's ticky boxes that make that a green environment, you can extend that out into other areas of that child's life. Yeah. Now, the last two are green activities. So these tend to be the things that they spend most time doing, the things that create a lot of routine and structure for them within their lives. So it will be their hobbies and special interests, if you like. For me, it would be watching penguin videos, listening to Kate Bush. I'm obsessed with penguin videos and Kate Bush. So whenever I don't feel too great, these are activities that I go to that have the ability to really calm me down and help me stay in that green phase again. For Daniel, it would be playing piano, going hill walking, doing his OU course. He's doing an OU course at the moment, physics and computing, which he loves. So yeah, these are the kind of things that Daniel likes, but it could be, you know, various things really. And again, it's really important to think about what they are, because if you know what they are, you can create times in the day where they can have access to them activities, and it's going to stabilize them back down into that green phase. Yeah. And then last thing, not everybody has this, but green objects. So like some autistic people and some people in general actually might have objects that have a really strong emotional connection for them. So these are objects that when they're not feeling great, remind them of a positive time, or, you know, they might smell a certain way that kind of tricks their brain into going into a more positive mindset, or they might feel a certain way that does that as well. So for Daniel, it would be pebbles that he carries in his pocket that he got on holiday one year, connected to a really kind of positive holiday that we had. We haven't had many positive holidays, but this one was good, yeah. And then he has a large teddy penguin that, you know, he will carry about when he's distressed, and that has the ability to kind of help him transition from A to B, change his kind of emotional mindset back to more kind of positive. So yeah, these are all things really to consider, because if you can work out what they are, you can create more of it in their life. And the more green things you have, the more likely you are to stay in that green phase for a wee bit longer. Yeah, so does that all make sense, Alison? Yeah, cool. So yeah, not a lot of people focus on that green, but if you have a child with poor self-esteem and confidence, it's a good idea to just spend a bit of time on that as well. Yeah. So yeah, so one of the things that are going to help then is just, yeah, it kind of goes without saying, knowing that you're on their side. So one of the things that I would really say is being very open about the diagnosis if possible. Now, obviously, there are some situations where autism will come along with additional learning difficulties, etc. That might make it very difficult for that person to understand their diagnosis. But if a person is at a level where they can understand some information, never underestimate their ability to know that they are different in some way. So it might be that you do start that process of helping them understand. Now, this is where some people go wrong sometimes, because sometimes people will sit a person like across from them or next to them, and the first thing they say about diagnosis is, hey, you have a diagnosis of autism. And that's the opening conversation. And it's really tricky if you do that, because then you almost have to kind of work out, well, how are you going to describe autism? And you know yourselves that autism is one of the most complex conditions that you can have. So it can be very difficult to then kind of find the words to describe what that means to your child or the person. So the way that I would typically do it, which is slightly kind of easier on you and easier on the person that you're helping with, is to just start some dialogue about the fact that we're all unique and different. And it could be really helpful to get a big sheet of old wallpaper, turn it upside down, get some loads of coloured pens and things, and then draw a picture and write the names of some of the people in the family, and just list what everybody's strengths and weaknesses are. So what's mum good at? What's dad good at? What are they not so good at? And if possible, help the child to say things as well. Now, they're going to say some things like, you're not good because you shout a lot, kind of thing. You have to validate that and write it down, okay? You can't just go, oh, no, I'm not writing that down. That's a bit confronting. Write it down, yeah, because you're also going to be telling them difficult things that they find difficult. So yeah, now what then happens is you've then opened up that dialogue that, look, we're all very unique and different. We all have things we're good at. We all have things we're not so good at. Is when you then introduce the word autism, you could use that to go back and start the conversation from, see all these things you're really good at, that's because, you know, you have autism. That's because of who you are as a person and how your brain works. And what you're doing there is something really important, because you're linking the word autism straight away to a positive. And that's super important, yeah. Whereas if you do it the other way, you might be more prone to talking about the difficulties faced, just because they're easier for you to think of. And you then link the word autism straight away to negatives. So yeah, we top tip there. I actually have a handout about helping your child to, you know, understand their diagnosis. So that's something that I can send on to Alison that she can put within that pack, okay? But yeah, helping them understand it is a lifelong development condition. So we have it all our lives, but it's not all doom and gloom. There are some amazing things about being autistic, yeah? So trying to focus in on some of them. And that could mean giving them very positive information about autism. You know, we know that lots of people with autism have a really good focus for detail. They can be very honest, which sometimes can be embarrassing, but sometimes can be a really nice thing too. We can be very creative people. We have lots of amazing people through history and today who, you know, actors, actresses, musicians, artists, autistic comedians. So yeah, talking about other people that you might have kind of researched online that are also autistic, and how, given the right kind of support, they can go on to achieve amazing things too, yeah. So it's definitely not all doom and gloom, yeah. Like we were saying, giving lots of opportunities for feel-good experiences. So definitely, like, because we all need positive experiences in our lives, don't we? That's what helps kind of boost their self-esteem. Now, just remember that what might feel good for somebody with autism might not necessarily be what makes you feel good. So you're going to have to be open to different things here. Like, for example, I know that when my daughter was in that really difficult stage, what really felt good for her is being in her room on her own, and she was playing CS:GO with people and talking to them on a headset. Now, at the time, I was kind of in a mindset that that's not good for you, and I don't want you to spend all your, evening doing that. What would be good for you is if you come down and spend some time with the family and watch telly and, have a conversation with us. That's what would be good for you. But actually, nowadays, I think about that really differently, because at the time, Rachel was really struggling with kind of that side of life, if you like. And actually, looking back reflectively, I understand that being around people in person was really anxiety provoking for her. Whereas, spending time with people online, she was talking to them. She doesn't have to work out facial expressions or gestures. So it just opens up that ability to just have a conversation with somebody. She can make social faux pas if that person doesn't want to speak to her again, fine, kind of thing. So I think that during that period, now reflectively looking back, Rachel learned a lot of social skills during that time, even though she was just in a room on the computer on a headset. So yeah, and those experiences made her feel better about herself. Whereas from a parent perspective, I was just thinking, no, that's not healthy for you, kind of thing. Yeah. So you have to be open in the way that you think about these things. And sometimes that's quite difficult. Yeah. Similarly, like, I got a bit of a kind of shock from Daniel's psychologist recently. Sometimes she's very blunt in telling me the way it is, and that's cool. That's okay. But one of the things that I'd found up to say to her is that I'm not really happy right now, because that the people that support Daniel's supported one-to-one as an adult through an organisation, they're not really encouraging him to build social interactions with other people. They're just happy to follow the routine that Daniel's put in place of going swimming twice a week and going for a chippy after he's been swimming, a walk along the beach and then coming home, or going to Greg's twice a week. And I was like, this isn't really building Daniel's ability to be around and understand other people. And what the psychologist said was that Daniel's in a really anxious phase just now. And actually, if you put him out into the kind of wider world and expect him to interact with other people, we're going to cause Daniel a lot of troubles. So maybe just now we have to get to a place where we understand that that routine, as much as it's the same every day and it seems boring to me, and I want more for Daniel in life, that's the right thing for Daniel just now. Yeah, so she did, like, I did go away and go, oh God, yeah, she's right, and I'm wrong again. And isn't it bizarre, because I train on this stuff all the time, but I still have difficulty putting it into practice when it comes to my own child. We have an emotional connection, yeah, that causes problems sometimes, yeah. So yeah, just thinking about what their feel-good experiences might be. For me, it's going to the gym every day and weightlifting. That forces lots of deep pressure through my body, which we know that deep pressure calms your central nervous system down. So if I miss a day at the gym, that's the day when I'm really going to struggle with my self-esteem and confidence and my anxiety levels. So yeah, thinking about what them feel-good experiences are and validating them. Not saying, oh no, that's daft or that's not helpful. Validate them, yeah. Validating their choices of activities and interests too. It might be sometimes that you're just not interested. Like, Daniel is very passionate about Doctor Who. I hate Doctor Who, especially the new Doctor Who. She's driving me absolutely batty. But I understand that that's an important thing in Daniel's life. So I should sit and watch that with him and listen to him talking about it, even though I'm not interested in it, because that boosts his self-esteem. That lets him know that this is good that you're interested in this, and other people might be interested in it too. And yeah, while we're having a conversation about that, he feels great about himself. And so I would engage in that. And like similarly, they would listen to me talking about penguins, and they also listen to Kate Bush on repeat, which they've just kind of learned to live with. Yeah, so it's about validating them choices too, and also their knowledge. So, you know, anything that they're very knowledgeable about. And here's another really good example. Daniel knows all the Stagecoach timetables, and that blows my mind. Again, I'm completely not interested in it. It doesn't help me to know what time to get a bus from Glasgow to Inverness and what the number of the bus is called, because I'm not going to ever be making that journey. But I still value his knowledge and understand that that's something that's really important to him. Yeah. And I would say, oh, wow, that's amazing that you know things like that. Yeah. And it doesn't have to be something as complicated as that. Like Daniel's got really good memory, but lots of us don't have good memory. So it could be something far more simple than that. Like I just like playing with sensory toys, and then you join in with me and you're validating, you know, my kind of choice of activity by joining in, by being around me and smiling and taking part in that. Yeah, so it doesn't have to be complicated, if that makes sense. Yeah. And if you are taking part with them as well, remember that that might just be for short periods of time. Yeah, so don't be like, oh, I'm going to sit with you for an hour and do this activity, because there's possibly a chance that during that hour they become overwhelmed with your expectations, and then that activity ends on a negative of them using their behaviour to get you to leave them or stop talking. So remember, very short, sharp base. You don't want to be doing that activity for a long time, kind of thing. Yeah. Does that make sense, Alison? Yeah. Cool. Right, so it goes without saying, we just said this before as well, that improving your communication is really going to help. So, you know, I'm not really going to dwell on this slide because we all know, you know, what good communication is, but it's going to essentially help reduce confusion, and it's going to therefore improve self-esteem. Yeah, because if you understand what's going on, what the demands and expectations are, you're going to feel better about being able to fulfill them then, and that's going to boost your self-esteem. Yeah, for sure. Right, so something else, like this is something that, yeah, Sarah Hendricks, a lady with autism, you might have heard her speak before. She has some really good videos on the NAS YouTube channel, and she does a lot of the NAS conferences as well. She's amazing to speak to. But she talks about like how when she was growing up, she, like me, has this kind of assumption that everybody else's life is perfect and everybody else is happy all the time, and I'm just not, because I'm not getting it. Yeah, and I don't think technology helps with that nowadays, does it? Because, you know, people are only going to put online the good parts. You know, nobody tells you about when they're having a really crappy day and they can't get out of bed and they're struggling to even wash or brush their teeth, kind of thing. So there can be this understanding that kind of everybody has that perfect life. And she said like that if you're looking for a perfect life, you're just not going to find it. And she finds it really helpful to work on the 70-30 ratio. I like this because I'm quite mathematically driven. So the idea being that as long as 70% of my life is going okay, then that's good. That's okay, kind of thing. Yeah. Now, one of the things that we'll often really struggle with is the secret rules around communication. And so sometimes being around people can be really overwhelming. So like, you know how we have a lot of unwritten rules within our life that we follow. And these rules are things that you never saw written down. Nobody's ever taught you them. You just kind of know them from watching and observing other people and how they behave. And then you take that on as, oh, that's the way to behave in this situation. Yeah. Now, sometimes people with autism will really struggle with that because they might be very on agenda, they're not watching everybody, or they might be like many females to really analysing people and watching their behaviour and then copying it, but they really don't understand all the subtleties within that. So if you think about it, social rules are very complex because they change depending on who you're with, the environment, what age you are. Yeah, so just some examples would be silly examples, but they're good examples to illustrate this. So like, say, for example, you can go to the toilet in your house with the door slightly ajar, but you can't go to the toilet with the door ajar when you're at school, Tanya, or when you're in a supermarket toilet. That's going to get you into trouble. Yeah, so that would be an example. One that tripped Daniel up, you can go to the toilet outside. If you're hill walking, you can just pee against a bush, but you can't take your trousers down and pee against TSB Bank when you need the toilet if you're out shopping. Yeah. Another one could be like it changes depending on the people that you're with. So like one that's tripped me up before is, you know how when you're at home and you're having dinner and you like a chip on somebody's plate, you can nick that chip and nobody will really mind. But if you're in a restaurant with your friends and you like a chip on their plate, that is not your chip, Tanya Tennant. Do not take that. Yeah. So, you know, just, and then, you know, lots of different rules around age as well. There's things that you can do when you're younger that you can't necessarily do when you're older. So, yeah, rules can be a really, really tricky thing. And, you know, when it comes to interacting and spending time with people, there are so many rules, aren't there? Like, for example, sorry, I've gone forward kind of a few slides there, sorry. So, like, for example, knowing how to approach somebody and say, hi, my name's Tanya, all those things I was talking about last time, knowing how to start a conversation, what to talk about, when to stop, where the pauses are, all these things are kind of secret rules in life as well. Yeah, so very confusing. So it makes sense then that when they're around situations like that, they're going to maybe become very overwhelmed and anxious. Yeah. Now, one of the things we should say that's going to help with self-esteem and confidence is obviously praise and being positive. But this is a really tricky area because lots of people don't like praise who are autistic. I would be a really good example of that, and so would my daughter. So we don't cope very well with, and some of you might relate to this, face-to-face praise. And the reason for that is that it requires face-to-face interaction. And say when that person says you've done something really well there, it could be really difficult to understand the context. You're trying to read the facial expressions, the gestures. You're trying to remember back to when that thing happened that they're referring to, that they're praising you for. And that can be difficult if you've got memory issues that, like, we can't get into today, but lots of people with autism have autobiographical memory issues. But it can also be difficult because when somebody praises you, they expect a response. And sometimes it can be difficult to navigate, well, what response are they looking for? What should I say back? And I find this so difficult that, like, when I was working for NAS, I remember one day my boss praised me highly in a meeting because we were funded by the big lottery and we'd done a lottery report, and I have that focus for detail. So I kind of made sure the lottery report was spot on with all the facts and figures and everything. and the lottery fed back that it was an excellent report. So she was praising me in front of all my kind of colleagues, and the first thing that came out my mouth was, shut up. And yeah, you can imagine in that situation with somebody quite high up in the NES, telling them to shut up in front of a room of other people was not the right thing to do. But that comes from a place of being really anxious around praise and not understanding what to say and just wanting that person to shut up. Yeah. So you have to be careful with praise. I cope much better with visual praise, and I think a lot of people with autism would be quite similar to me. So, you know, it could be writing it in a text, writing it in an email, it could be writing wee post-it notes that you put places, or one that I've seen recently is like a family who had one of those sticky kind of stickers on the wall, and it was a blossom tree, and they would stick post-it notes onto the blossom tree with kind of positive affirmations, and you could just look at it on the way by and go, yeah, I did do really well with that, and move on with your day without that need to interact. Yeah, so that's one thing. And then the other thing I would say is that sometimes like individuals might really struggle as well, because we're more prone, especially in our education services, to only praising when people do things, you know, really, really well. We don't praise the little things all the time. So like an example of that would be my daughter when she was at secondary school, and she's very academically bright, but at the awards ceremony, it was only like people that got like the absolute top marks, or the absolute perfect attendance was a good example. So they would get an award for perfect attendance. But what I would say to Rachel's teachers are, you're not validating the amount of effort that Rachel has put in to get to school on the days when she has managed to get to school. And, you know, she isn't praised for that, because they would see that, well, it wasn't perfect attendance, so we can't offer kind of praise for that. Whereas I see that slightly differently. I think we boost the fact that you did brilliant today, getting out your bed, hen, and getting dressed and doing all that difficult stuff and getting through the gates to school and coming in and meeting people. And yeah, maybe you've only done it one day this week, but I understand how difficult that was. Well done, that was amazing. We have a similar situation just now where she's not always managing all her university lectures. She'll keep telling me I'm useless, I'm not doing a good job, Mum, I've missed all these lectures. I come from a different perspective. Think about the day when you did do really well with that. You did an amazing job. She finds it harder to do simple things than other people find it to do. Yeah, so hopefully you kind of understand what I'm talking about there. Yeah. Now, another reason why it's really good to focus on that is because a lot of people can, with autism, be prone to catastrophizing. So catastrophizing is where you have a worry or you have an anxiety and you're not able to break that worry or anxiety down, and your brain automatically takes you to the worst possible scenario that is there. We do see that females struggle with this more, but males also struggle with catastrophizing. Yeah, this is an area that I really struggle with, and I was talking to my kind of mental health kind of supports a few years ago. I did CBT and things like that. Won't go into that. Yeah, but one of the things that they taught me to do, which was really helpful, that if you have a person who's kind of bogged down with worries or catastrophizing, is to think about your worries in a traffic light system. So what we did at the time was, when I had a worry, I would write it down on a piece of paper, and then I had 3 boxes in front of me, a red, an amber and a green box. Now the red box meant that's an emergency, we need to do something about it right now. You're absolutely right to be worried about it, and you probably will need help with that. Yeah, so that was your red worry. Your amber was, it's a legitimate worry, but it's not an emergency. You can still ask other people's opinions and help, but you don't need to deal with it immediately. Yeah, and then a green worry was something that was, it's not really a worry. There's nothing you can do about it, and the likelihood of that happening is really, really slim. Yeah, almost to zero. So you can see some examples of that. This one's more for kind of, like, I used it as an example for adults with autism, but so it's very kind of adult led, but you could think of things that children would struggle with. So like, obviously, if you receive a letter of eviction, that's an emergency red, that needs posted in that box. Or if you're going to run out of money and you have no money for your food, that's an emergency. If you just have a bill that's outstanding, it's not an emergency. You've got a few days to kind of work your way through that. Or if you're worried about attending an appointment, again, you've got time to ask for help and support with that leading up to that. And then these kind of green worries that I have all the time and catastrophize about them. So you're on a bus and you're worried it's going to crash, or you're worried about being struck by lightning when you're on a walk. Or one of my most recent worries was when Boris Johnson got COVID, and I don't not get political, but I don't really like Boris Johnson. I don't agree with a lot of the things he said. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. And I'm not really interested in him. I don't care much about his life. But when I heard on the news that he got COVID, it just took me into this spiral of worry about what was now going to happen, who would take over, what would they be like, would they make changes for the better, for the worst, and it led to days and days of not sleeping. So yeah, that was definitely a green worry. Yeah, I've no business being worried about a man that I don't even really know. Yeah, and the likelihood of him dying because of that, yeah, slim to zero probably. Yeah. So to start with, I used to functionally do it. So you need the boxes in front of you. You need to get the worry out your head, write it down. But nowadays, I don't need to do that. I just visualize writing the worry, and then I can visualize which box it's going into. So you might, with some people, need to help them place it in the box. My psychologist did that to start with. And then once it's in the box, you can help them to plot a pathway forward of how they're going to deal with that. And the more you do things like that, the better they'll get at kind of managing worries, because they'll build up their capacity to kind of, think of problem solving things, if you like. Yeah. Now, probably, take a wee breath. Hold on a minute. Yeah, well, you read this. So probably the other thing that we can be very prone to doing is ruminating. So this is where, like, you might have a worry again and it just stays in your brain and you just keep going over and over and over and over it, and you just can't get it out your head. Every time you try and do something else, the worry comes straight back to you. So most of you would recognise that where you're trying to get to bed at night and to sleep, because it impacts on our sleep. And it can impact a lot on individuals with autism sleep, because one of the things that happens is that when we're in anxious situations, we often don't process that information at the time. Like, this is your child who's like maybe struggling to process information at school, and they're masking and they're just sitting really quietly and don't look as if they're having any significant bothers. But it could also be that child who's having very distressed behaviour because of their anxiety and also not processing. Now, what can happen in them situations is your brain won't process the language and the events that's taken place. And then what happens is when they get home and they start to, reduce the people around them, reduce the expectations and demands, that ability to process your day retains again. And then when you start to process everything, your anxiety increases, and that's what then leads to kind of meltdown situations, maybe in the evening or just before bed, or can lead to you not being able to sleep. It's because your brain's calmed down a wee bit, the ability to process has come back, but that shot your anxiety high again. Yeah. So rumination can look like lots of different things for people. It could be worrying about something that might happen because it happened in the past, like being on a bus and you've been on that bus before and the branches fell and broke the window of the tree. Next time you're on a bus, you're ruminating that what if that happens again? What will I do? It could be difficulty getting past negative feelings of angry or scared. You just can't shift your brain to a more positive place. It could be continuing to ask the same question long after getting the answer. So you've asked a question, but it hasn't registered the answer. So you forget and you ask again later on. It could be constantly going over previous conversations, known as looping thoughts, where again you try to shift, but it just keeps coming back. Could be repeating the same reaction over again, repetitive restricted behaviours, talking about things that happened a long time ago, or giving the same answer to different questions even when it doesn't make sense sometimes. So ruminating is a big issue for a lot of people with autism. So how we can help with that just really quickly is trying to look at what's making them really anxious. So like we said before with all them green things, there'll be many strategies that will help reduce a person's anxiety. I told you for me, it would be having a bath, watching penguin videos, listening to music, going a dog walk. For other people, it could be a variety of other things as well. It could be some sensory activities too. But having a think about what their kind of strategies are that reduce anxiety, because the more opportunities they have to do them things, and between the difficult periods of the day, the more we can help them keep coming back down into that green. Exercise, because being physically active gets deep pressure going through your body. It calms your central nervous system down. Going outside, so even just into the garden for a wee while. There are numerous studies done on the benefits of nature and walking in nature and how that can reduce them kind of ruminating thoughts. Like it says, my son goes a huge walk most days and we've seen a massive improvement in his moods. It could be distraction. So having something that can temporarily distract you. Now, the things that are going to distract autistic people are the things that are their special interests. So, you could use that by, if you see them starting to kind of ruminate or get really distressed, you come in with the thing that they can't help but get involved in. Like if I'm anxious and you ask me questions about penguins, I'm like, well, I know loads about penguins. And then before I know it, I'm in a conversation about penguins and I forgot that I was ruminating about something. So and it might even be things that you can't be bothered talking about. But if it does the job of reducing that, that's a good thing to do. It could be putting a favourite video on. It could be a favourite song that changes the way their brain feels because it has a positive connection. It could be a positive smell connection. It could be just asking questions about bus timetables, for example. Meditation and mindfulness too, although a lot of people with autism really struggle with that, because it can be really hard to shift. That's a difficult thing to shift from ruminating thoughts to sitting, essentially not doing anything. And learning how to deep breathe can be quite tricky for them as well. And also imagining you're somewhere nicer can be very tricky. Like my psychologist tried to do that with me and I just couldn't imagine being on a beach because I wasn't. I was sitting on a chair in Cumnock Health Centre. So that can be quite tricky sometimes, but it can be, it can work in certain situations. The other thing could be using that red, amber, green to help them problem solve. That would be a good one. And then another thing, if the understanding level there, is to help self-reflection. So this is where you maybe have a situation. Actually, I have a good visual of this, so let me move to it. Don't worry about all these slides. We've talked a lot about some of them things already, okay? So this would be a good example where, like, you maybe set up a visual situation where you are helping them in a situation where something went wrong. to reflect back on that, because there's nothing you could do at the time. You couldn't anticipate that that was going to be difficult for them. So you just got through it the best that you could. But what we can do later on when they're calmer is take them back, you know, help them to work through what was going on. What did I do that caused the social error? Here's what happened when I did that. Here's what I could do to make things right, and here's what I could do next time to kind of deal with that situation a wee bit better next time. Yeah. So reflectively looking back is definitely going to be helpful. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, yeah, again, don't worry about all them. I've talked about a lot of that stuff. And then the other thing is to help them kind of build their interoceptive awareness. So interoception is one of our 8 senses that helps you pick up on your internal feelings. And one of the things it does is to help you pick up on them feelings that are related to emotions, so that you can understand how you're feeling and then put strategies in place to then reduce them emotions. So building better kind of social emotional resilience is going to be key to helping people in these situations. So this would be like, it's quite a complicated example, but you could filter this down to look like lots of things. So this is an example of how we've helped Daniel with that. So we help him to relate his feelings to numbers and colours, and we help him throughout the day to check in with how he is feeling. So he has an alarm on his phone that goes, check how you're feeling, and then he can look at his emotions checker and check in. So say he was feeling a number 3, he's really anxious. He then has reflective trigger sheets that we've set up following situations where he's found it very difficult. And he can then look for the trigger sheet, which, as you can see, then has solutions that he can follow to deal with and manage that emotion that he's feeling and get back into that green again. Now, this could look very different, so I'm going to send different examples to Alison. You could just have 1 or 2 emotions on it. You could link it to just a page that has, here's some of the strategies that help you calm down when you feel like that. You could, even if they can't read, you could have photographs of strategies. Some people have put an amber box where there are activities that help them to calm down, so that when they feel that emotion, they go to that box and get those things out. Or it could be something complicated like this, yeah. So really trying to focus on building that emotional resilience, being able to check in with how you feel and know what to do to kind of help that emotion, yeah? So that makes sense, Alison, yeah. I will send out that stuff to you, Alison, so you can put that within the packs, okay? Now, I know we're coming up to the end of time, but I just have another few things to go through. Is that okay, Alison? Yeah, so I'm going to whiz through some slides just because I've kind of talked about it, okay? So don't worry about that. Yeah, right. So this is another really good strategy. So like a way of thinking about your child's life if they're struggling with social interaction or they're becoming very isolated. So it's called energy accounting. Some of you might have heard of it before, or you might have heard of it. It's called spoon theory. Yeah. Now, the idea behind it is that everybody will wake up, you know, in the morning with a certain amount of energy. And for autistic people, that could be based on whether they slept well, whether they are ill or not, whether they've recovering from a meltdown that they maybe had the day before, how busy their week's been, and whether when they wake up, they understand what's going to happen that day. So these things are all going to impact on their energy bank. Now, you've got your amount of energy that you wake up with, and straight away when you wake up, things will start to make withdrawals. So the main things that are going to make withdrawals are the things that we see on the kind of left side here. So socializing. Now, we're not just talking about being out with friends and family, although that is socializing, or being in a community. We're just talking about getting out your bed in the morning and suddenly you're expected to engage with the rest of the family while you're getting ready for school, nursery, or getting ready to go out and do something. So socializing, we need to think of really broad, yeah? Change is really going to make a withdrawal because we can't always socially imagine what that change means to us. Making mistakes because we can often strive for perfection, sensory issues, just doing your daily living skills. Like, I've had one day this week where it had been a really busy week. I worked all weekend as well, and I just got so socially exhausted that just getting out my bed and getting my teeth brushed and washing was really difficult for me. So a lot of you would call that a pajama day, but it's a bit trickier than a pajama day, because on a pajama day you could probably still have a wash and kind of put fresh pajamas on. What we're talking about here is the complete inability to do anything like that, yeah? Sensitivity to other people's moods. We know most autistic people are incredibly empathetic, or being teased or excluded, yeah? Now, the idea is that for all the things that make a withdrawal in somebody's day, we want to interspace these deposits in between, and that's what's going to, when the withdrawal makes them anxious, the deposit is going to calm that back down again, yeah? So you can see a list of deposits. Solitude would be your number one. Time on your own without people, yeah? Time with your special interest, routine and structured, etc, etc. Now, the way that I do this is that Mark and I sit with my diary on a Sunday and we look through the diary for the week, and everything that makes a withdrawal is coloured in red. Some things are coloured in amber because I can do 1 or 2 or 3 of them in a row, but the rule is that 1 red or 3 ambers must be followed up by a green, and that's the way that I kind of stabilise and manage to, you know, do the things that I need to do during the week. So having a think about your child or the person you're supporting's energy accounting and how can you balance that out, and that's a really good slide to take into schools and nurseries and colleges and unis too, or workplaces, because if they can structure the day so that that's like that, or you can structure your evenings at home so it's like that, you're going to have less kind of anxiety and meltdowns because of that, yeah? So we think to concentrate on, but also thinking about your energy accounting, because if you're not okay, your children are not okay, yeah? Now, when it comes to, just really quickly, when it comes to that kind of complete isolation that we kind of talked about earlier, then what's usually happened in that person's life is they have way too many withdrawals and they've lost their trust in life, if you like, and people around them. And so they might start to isolate themselves into the house, like I said with Rachel, into a bedroom, not going to school or college or uni anymore, etc. And yeah, where I went wrong, because I'll tell you where I went wrong. Where I went wrong was that I had this expectation that that's not okay. You need to come down and have dinner. You need to watch telly. You need to try and come to the shop. And I kept knocking on her bedroom door and just putting myself in that environment and putting really unpredictable social demands on her. Like, she'd be playing on a computer or listening to music. Right, come on, come down, it's time for dinner, come and have dinner. And she'd say, no, I can't do that. Oh, for goodness sake, you know, what's wrong about having dinner with the rest of the family? We're not, you know, we're not horrible people. And, you know, at the time, I thought that I was encouraging her to come out. Reflectively looking back, what I was doing was helping her to isolate more, because she was absolutely scared to come out that bedroom because she didn't know what social demand I was going to place on her next. So took a wee shift of the way I was dealing with it, which is really important sometimes. Stop, reflect, change your approach. And what I did, which is really elongated, it was really difficult to do, but it worked a charm. I told you she's now at uni in her 4th year. So I set up a situation where after work I would go in and say to her, like, when I come home from work tomorrow, is it okay if I come at 4 o'clock and sit with you in your room for 5 minutes? I won't talk or ask you anything. We'll just sit together, and when that's finished, I'll leave. And she said, I think I can do that, yeah. So we started with that. I did what I said I was going to do. 4 o'clock on the button, left after 5 minutes on the button, didn't talk, didn't even look in her direction. She then goes, all right, mum's doing what she said she was going to do. Then eventually we got to the stage of, can I come in and tell you 3 things about my day? Yep. Went in, did what I said I was going to do. We're building up trust again. Then can I come in and you can tell me 3 things about your day? And I'm giving her processing time because we're organising it like a while in advance. Yep, that's cool. So we did that. And then eventually it was, can I play CSGO with you? And sit with you for a bit longer? Yeah, that would be okay, mum. And then eventually what I was able to do was, how's about you come down and eat dinner with us? We promise not to talk to you or look at you. We're not going to place any demands on you. And because we'd built up that trust that I'm going to do what I say I'm going to do, she said yes. That was a glorious evening. And then eventually we got to, how's about you come to Tesco's with me? Here's what's going to happen. Here's how long, when we're coming back. Yes. And it was just through a lot of effort like that that we got her back into, you know, the big bad world, if you like. Now, really difficult. None of that was easy, but really that's the only way to tackle that kind of isolation, because they've just lost their trust. So it's about finding that person to build up trust with again. Eventually you can add more people in then to build up that trust bubble, but essentially you have to start with one. So say you had a child who wasn't going to school, it's about, who is that person that maybe could come out to the home and do some kind of education in the home that they can build up as a green person? Can they follow them kind of rules? And then can that person then help them transition back into school? Yeah. Now, the other thing you might have to do there is what I call back chaining. So I don't know if anybody's ever heard of back chaining before. You just forget all that. Yeah. So, yeah, I think I have it. Oh, maybe I haven't got a slide for that. Sorry, guys. I thought I did. No, I don't think I have a slide for that, so I'll just talk about it. Yeah, so what I mean by back chaining then is where it's the opposite of forward chaining, really. So if you're forward chaining, you would give somebody a job to do, and you expect them to do that job from the start through to the end. Now, there's going to come a part where they go, I can't do that, and they end that situation on a negative. So, you know, teaching a child to put the jacket on and they get stuck at one bit and then, oh, I can't do this. So forward chaining doesn't work for autistic people because it ends on a negative. They're less likely to do it again. Whereas back chaining is the opposite, where you help them with the thing right until the last bit and expect them to do the last bit, and then you gradually do less and less. And that can be really helpful for helping children in these situations. So rather than like sending them in at the start of a school day where they can leave once they get upset, or at the start of assembly and it's okay, you can usually take a break and leave when you've had enough. What we would do, because you're always going to end on a negative there because they're upset, what we would do is bring them in at the very end for 10 minutes or for half an hour of school. They end on a positive and then we gradually back chain it. So back chaining is a really, really important thing to do in that sense, yeah? The other thing that you can see that I did with Rachel is build a sensory coping strategy bag. So Rachel has, like me, lots of sensory issues. When she goes out into the bigger world, she's noise, touch sensitive, you know, all these kind of things. So we both have sensory coping strategy bags. And in our bags are things like twiddle toys to aid concentration, ear defenders or earphones to listen to music through, or I've got earbuds that are like bits of silicone that you can mould and put in your ear, because can't wear ear defenders because I'm touch sensitive. Other things that I have is sunglasses, hat, hoodie to block out visual or light stimulation. I have Under Armour, so clothing that is, you know, really tight on my skin, high lycra content, because that kind of helps that fear of touch that I have, because when people touch me, it's like an electric shock going through my body. So if I have my Under Armour on, it calms my touch senses, it gives deep pressure, calms my central nervous system. So yeah, making up sensory coping strategy bags, so then when they do go out into the world, they've got the means to kind of reduce some of that stimulation, if you like. Yeah. Now, just 3 more minutes then, so yeah, and then we'll stop for that break and then questions. So some of the other strategies that might be really helpful, yeah. So sometimes, like when we're helping people to make friends and understand, you know, how to approach people. So say you have the opposite, you have a child who really wants to make friends, then sometimes it's about teaching them and doing a lot of kind of role play of how to say hi, you know, what to talk about, how to exit when you've had enough. So like some of the strategies that I've used before is conversation cubes, where like it's a game of cubes and they have different topics or questions on them, and you throw the cube and you have a timer and you have so long to tell that person everything that you know about that subject, or to ask that person that question. So it's quite a nice game because it's helping build waiting, turn taking, but it's also helping extend their conversation that they can use. Yeah, so it's going to help with things like that. And you know, being able to move away from just talking about your favourite subject and allow somebody else to talk as well, even though you're bored. And then other things would be exit strategies. So how to get out when you've had enough. So that could be a take a break card. It could be teaching a hand signal or a phrase that you've taught them. But one of the things I like using is a mood band. So it's like a charity band. It's red on one side, green on the other. It says I'm okay, I'm not okay. And it's a nice way of letting people know, stop. I can't do this anymore. I need you to be quiet. I need you to give me space, yeah? But then there are another few things that are going to be trouble. So finding the right friends. It's not unusual for us to struggle to know who's a good friend, who's a bad friend. So this is an example that's not necessarily a great example, I'm going to be honest, but it was written by an autistic person. And the idea is just to have them to list what is a true friend, what is a kind of hoax friend, and what should you do with true friends, and what could you do if you had a hoax friend. So again, I've got all this in the booklet so I can send it out to Alison and pass it on. That's an example of just like what I call differentiation work, where they might be struggling with social rules, where things apply, where do they not apply, who can you talk to about something, who can you not, where can you do that behaviour, where can you not do it. So the idea is just that you have concentric circles and you talk, you know, you label the people in your child's life, and then you just help them to match. You know, who could you talk to about that? Who could you not? Where can you do that activity? Where can you not do that activity? You have to do it visually because these are quite complex teachings. So if we do it verbally, sometimes the information doesn't stay in the brain, whereas if it's visual, that's going to help a wee bit more, yeah? And last one would be just understanding different relationships and people within your life. So this is a good exercise. I call it Road to Relationships, where you put different levels of people, and then you would ask your child a series of questions, and for every question they answer yes, they buy a brick on the road. And the idea is that if you can't answer yes to any of the questions about that person, they're a stranger. If you they do know a wee bit about you, or you do see them often. It might be somebody you meet, like the shopkeeper or the bus driver. By the time you've got loads of bricks on your road, that should be a person that is either a close friend or somebody you can have a relationship with, because they then know a lot about you. So that could be a really good kind of strategy to help you know, young people navigate relationships and friendships and things like that as well. Okay, now there are lots of other examples in the booklet I'm going to send out, so have a look at the booklet when it comes through. Okay, but for now, that's me finished.